This is Mindblowers. I'm Daniel Kafer, and today I'm joined by Michael Rosmer, also known as the Offshore citizen. In this episode, we explore who's quietly taking the lead in building a fully automated, AI-driven society, and why China may already be a decade ahead. We dive into the global AI and robotics race, the struggle for energy dominance, and how America's incoherent energy strategy could become a critical weakness. Plus, could the US, through its obsession with insuring against every possible downside and complex tariff policies, be slowing itself down while giving China room to surge ahead? So, welcome to the Mindblowers Podcast, and welcome to Michael Rosmer. Great to see you again.
Great to see you again, Daniel. Great to be back here talking to you guys about what's coming up on the exciting horizon.
Let's start with how you see the development in robotics and kind of gel that together with China, the China policies, and why the U.S. administration is so worried about China and China dominating production capacity, dominating maybe the robots market. What is your view on that?
Okay, I mean, just so many places that one can discuss in this regard. So also curious to hear your views. I think, just very clearly we can sort of go back and look that for about the last 250 years, we've just gradually been automating more and more stuff. And robots are, I think, the way that we all imagine them, the ultimate realization of being able to replace people in almost any physical function, right? Of course, we have robots in factories and, very specific robots for different stuff. And, even if you think about from an agricultural standpoint, you've got some big turbine that operates basically based on GPS and automate. I mean, it's basically a robot of its own sort. But I think when we're talking about this, we're talking about, that sort of last bit that is very tough to eliminate for humans, but actually represents like an enormous amount of labor, right? There's, literally probably, I don't know, what is it, hundreds of millions, billions of people who are running around doing stuff. We all do it in our day-to-day lives, whether it's folding the laundry or cooking or doing the dishes or what. And couldn't we have some sort of a robot that does that for us? And I think, obviously the answer is at some point, yes, we can. It's a little bit hard to figure out when. And I think there are really complex problems to solve both on the software and the hardware side. You just think about your hand, and like the precision of your fingers are just unbelievable, right? It's just really, really incredible. I remember listening to an interview with one of the senior people from Boston Dynamics, who was talking about how hard it was to get the gait right, where it can walk properly. And it really took the advent of some advances in artificial intelligence that allowed them to do that at a robotic level. Although interestingly, they seem to have advanced quite a bit since then. And so that's coming along, and just clearly that will be super important, right? You kind of imagine, well, we can have more or less unlimited productive output in kind of human terms if we can solve that problem and solve it at scale. And there's lots of challenges with scaling that up. I think we shouldn't underappreciate that. I just read an article the other day. Somebody was proposing that it will take about 50 years in a best case to get to 1 billion robots. I was mainly focusing on humanoid robots. And this is just frankly due to restrictions on like, okay, you have to get materials and you have to build factories, and a factory can only put out so many robots, and you need rare earth metals and so on or so forth. So, but clearly it's just going to be an incredibly important technology as it advances in whatever form it takes. And China just seems optimally positioned in the world to do this stuff. And so the current administration has clearly decided they want to try and shift a lot of the production away from China, ideally back to the U.S. But I think to some extent there's kind of, if it moves to Vietnam or to India or to Europe or whatever, that's kind of viewed as being better than if it is in the U.S. And I've heard this kind of described as, well, if you have a factory that makes BMWs or Mercedes, great. We'd rather that was made by a factory in the U.S., but frankly, at least the Germans aren't going to go and turn this into a thing to make tanks to come after us. And of course, in this case, we're talking more about making drones that are going to come after us. Right now, for those who aren't aware, the drone market is just dominated by the Chinese. DJI is like 90% of the market. Then you've got a few others. Now, yes, it depends a little bit if you're talking about, say, military drones, then the breakup is a little bit different. But you'll see these videos online where they have these massive drone swarms doing these cool demonstrations with lights on them, and it's a giant dragon going through the air and all this like really, really super cool stuff. The stuff that as kids you and I probably just dreamed about, right? That was probably like a fantastic thing that we thought, wow, this would be incredible. And what are you going to do to compete against that? You can see a little bit as well of just how successful these fairly low-tech drones have been from a military standpoint in overwhelming traditional weapon systems, say on ships, etc. And so I think there's a pretty broad realization that this is going to be a critical piece of infrastructure, and yet the U.S. owns very little of it. And so obviously at this point, they've enacted really high tariffs on China. We'll see how much that lasts over time. But then China has, in retaliation, done some tariffs, but also some restrictions on the U.S., one of which notably is on rare earth metals. These are used in various different batteries, etc. And so it's pretty important to be able to have access to them for a lot of advanced technology. My understanding is that from a mining standpoint, you can get it from a variety of parts of the world, but it's actually the refining of those into something usable that almost entirely is in China. And so the U.S. is really, really quite dominant. Now, I think the interesting question will be, to what extent can you shift that to the U.S. or to some other part of the world? Because I heard somebody suggest a while back that, this stuff is going to go to India. And of course, Foxconn and Apple just announced they're going to try and shift some stuff to India. But if you've ever been to India, you're going to find that this idea is like laughable. Like the productivity and efficiency of the systems in India are just incomparable to those of China, right? Like it is difficult to fathom for people who have not been to China just how sophisticated they are and how efficient. And some people kind of think that this is a deal with, wages are so low. People make hardly any money. No, that's not what's so great in China. First of all, wages are not that low. There's a great clip where Tim Cook is talking about this, how he says, listen, in Apple, we need to have people who can work with very precise tooling. And if you were to host a conference of those people in the US, you get a few attendees. When you go to China, you fill a stadium with those people. Like you need a lot of people who have these types of skills, and there just aren't a lot of them there. In addition to this, the supply chains and how things interrelate to each other. If you can go across the street and the person who's producing another part is doing so across there, and it's very quick to ship those things, and you can do rapid coordination, prototyping, and just-in-time deliveries, etc. That's it's an advantage for if you're producing these things. And so, although it's a nice idea to say, well, let's bring a bunch of this back to the U.S., there's a reason why it doesn't exist in the U.S., and that reason isn't just, oh, hey, well, wages are high or something. It's, well, we don't have the skilled people. We have a regulatory environment that makes it difficult to put this up. And one of the things that you and I were talking about prior to getting started here is the energy policy in the U.S. has just been utterly incoherent, whereas the Chinese are dominating in that. And so, I think there's a lot of dependencies that they need to play with simultaneously. Of course, the administration as the executive branch only has so much power to affect so many areas. You've also got federal versus state. And so I think it's a very complex problem for them to solve, to make the U.S. competitive enough for building these things that they don't just get dominated by China, because China's, frankly, the incumbent at this point.
So talking about energy policy, I mean, as far as I can see, China is relying on pretty much everything, right? That they are fine as long as they have plenty of energy, right? So it's all the way from coal to trying to invent fusion energy and using thorium reactors and so on.
Yep.
I'm quite familiar with the European energy policy, even though it is different, but like Germany went away from nuclear and got dependent on Russian oil and gas, and then there's a lot of focus on green energies, and the end result is just super expensive energy.
No, Germany has like a completely incongruent or coherent energy policy. Like, and I'm half German ancestry. I would love to love Germany in this, but the reality is, like, hey, listen, let's get rid of climate change and by shutting down our nuclear power plants and buying Russian oil. Yeah, that's making a lot of sense. And, of course, hey, let's use solar in a place where, let's be honest, it's not the best part of the world to have solar power. It's pretty suboptimal. So, yes, Germany is like the poster child of doing it badly. France has done quite well, right? France has managed to have lower inflation as a result of nuclear power. They've had more stable prices, better energy independence, etc. So, yeah, they're definitely doing it a fair bit better than Germany is at this point.
In what way is the US's energy policy incoherent?
So like you can just take a look at, I think the last time they built a nuclear power plant was in like the 70s or something. It takes just an absurd amount of time to get this done. In California, they wanted to install a bunch of green energy, solar wind, but then they decided that, well, we're not happy to have wires carrying that energy through our area into the cities. And so like they're blocking this. I mean, just these things that are just utterly asinine. And I think like it's really important to zoom out when you talk about energy. I've been making this comment lately that for any government, the most basic, if you want to think about like the most progressive possible policies you can have, you should be driving cost of living down. This is like, it will benefit the poorest people the most, but it benefits everybody, right? Cost of living down. And energy, it turns out, is about a 20% contributor to like a CPI basket. Now it's about 10% directly, but then it's a feedstock into everything, right? You can sort of think that what are the base inputs into everything? They're basically time, energy, and space, right? And so, okay, well, it affects the prices of everything. There's like nothing, even if you imagine like, say we're talking about clean water. Well, the truth is there is no shortage of water. There's a ton of it in the oceans. We're worried about ocean levels rising. And so, yeah, in some places, rivers are going down, lakes are going down, etc. Provided you have energy, you can suck it up from the ocean, you can pipe it across the country, you can go and you can purify it, you can clear in it. If you want to like make it good for drinking and stuff, you can add minerals back into it. But every step of that process requires a bunch of energy. And so the more energy you've got, the more capability you have to do those sorts of things. And if you look at the progression of like the quality of life of people in the world, there's a pretty tight correlation between consuming more energy and having a better quality of life. There's obviously more factors to it than just that, but I think we should want us all to have better quality of life. And that basically means that per capita, we want to increase the amount of energy we consume. And actually, there's a very interesting thing. There's a website called WTF Happened in 1971. And you can kind of go back and you look at all sorts of charts. They play some of them through, and they'll show, for example, a decoupling between wages and productivity. Up until sometime in the early 70s, wage growth and productivity growth were roughly going in lockstep. And then somewhere in the 70s, you had a divergence where productivity continued to grow and wages did not. Wages stagnated. And you can ask what this is. Now, there's certain people who will suggest, okay, well, that was 1971. Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard and printed money, and this is what's responsible. I think people are a little too quick to come to that interpretation. And one of the ways that I would think about it is in terms of energy. If you think about, we want to boost productivity as a society. What is productivity? It's more outputs for less inputs. And so you say, all right, well, going back, since the turn of the century until about 1971, you essentially had, well, you could kind of go back even before that, the amount of output we were getting from fuel, right? We had gone from us doing stuff, burning wood, burning coal, steam, then to burning oil and gas in internal combustion engines. And essentially the units of output we could get, like how did we fuel this whole industrial society? It was on the back of oil, right? That's what we did. And the price of, in inflation adjusted terms, the price of a barrel of oil basically went steadily down from about 1900 to the early 70s. And suddenly it jumped up by a factor of about 400%. And it basically never went down. It went down slightly as kind of the cartel stuff was resolved in the OPEC things. And that kind of led into the 80s. But it never returned to even close to what it was before. And we as a society should be thinking, okay, how do we get abundant, cheap energy for people? The way that I think about that is I think we want to get our cost of energy down by a factor of about 10. If you assume, say we're at maybe $5 per kilowatt hour, it obviously varies where you are in the world. But say you're at around 5, that means you want to be targeting, like, how do we get to 50 cents per kilowatt hour, right? Something in that range. And what that unlocks for us, like, so many things are unlocked on the back of cheap energy. And so then you can do a first principles analysis and you can say, well, how do I get to cheap energy, right? The reality is you could kind of do a pretty simple calculation. You can say, well, we have the capital cost of the stuff that we're building, plus the fuel cost, plus the maintenance cost. And, you have some lifespan calculation of the capital cost over time, and you've got some sort of, the cost of capital is some sort of a discount rate you're going to apply there. Well, what you note very quickly is that you can never get cheaper than the cost of fuel under any circumstances. And when we're using a finite resource, which is oil, and we're increasing the demand for that resource, you reach some stage where you're forcing the price up. And so what I would argue happened in the 70s in part was that our productivity gains increasingly went into the fuel part of it. It was basically value was captured there, and there's added cost as opposed to in wages. And so that couldn't translate across. And so I think we should be working a lot as a society on improving this. And so what is the U.S. doing? Well, it's very expensive to do nuclear, if at all possible, in the U.S. So that's problematic. Again, nuclear is nice because the density of energy in uranium, or you were mentioning thorium. So there was just an announcement out of China recently about some thorium reactor stuff that they've been doing, and it was kind of kept hush-hush. It was very secret for a long time, but they've apparently had this working. And so that drives costs down. You have energy density that's about 1 million times greater than oil. Granted, you have to capture it and convert it, and so you lose a lot along the way. But the point is just that your fuel costs can be much, much lower. And so then you're mostly just looking at the capital cost of the structure, which if you can increase the lifespan of that capital, then you're kind of decreasing it proportionally. And you can potentially have a lot lower maintenance cost if you can work on increasing efficiency gains there. And so that's one way that you can get costs down a lot. Another way that you can get costs down a lot is through solar. Again, you don't have to pay for fuel, right? Like, the sun is free. That's wonderful. You should just kind of be able to think that. Obviously, if we can make fusion work, which at some point we probably will, there's some optimism that now maybe we'll see working fusion by 2035 or something. They've been saying for the last 40 years that it was 20 years away. So, we'll see what happens in terms of the timelines. But, look at the number of nuclear power plants being constructed worldwide. China is building more than all the rest of the world combined. Like, it's insane. It's much, much greater. By the way, they dominate in solar, right? An enormous amount of the solar production and the advances, et cetera, come out of China. So they've just been much, much, much more practical about this. And they make things happen faster. They make it happen easier. As a result, they get to have on-the-ground, hands-on experience doing that stuff. And that learning translates into cost savings. You have Swanson's Law. For those who aren't familiar, this is basically a kind of principle in manufacturing that as you double the amounts of output production that you've got, you'll collapse the price of producing that thing. And so, yeah, this is just where China is just clearly doing a far better job than the U.S. is, and frankly, better than the most of the world is. And so if you say, well, we want lots of people to have lots of cheap, abundant energy, you're going to China for that, which, by the way, also translates into AI, because AI needs, massive amounts of energy. So if you want to have gigawatt reactors to power huge data centers, where are you going to do that? Okay, we've got something there. So
I tried to Google the cost of energy for different parts of the world, and it did seem that the U.S. actually had equally cheap energy compared to China. So I don't know if that was maybe for the consumer, and then like when we're talking industrial, it's a different case.
Yeah, there's a few different things that you have to get into there. So it varies a lot regionally. It varies a lot by source. So like one of the things is typically hydroelectric tends to be actually quite cheap. And so areas where you have hydroelectric, that can be a factor. You also have transportation of that stuff. But if you kind of go and look at the cost to build nuclear reactors, for example, I think they're like a factor of 3 more expensive in the US versus China or something like that. And there's a variety of different things that go into that. If you deconstruct the price of nuclear, one of the things that actually is quite important is the cost of capital, because it's quite capital intensive up front. And so if your interest rates are like 10%, then that's going to make it difficult to make it viable. Whereas if your interest rates are 0, then your cost of capital is super low. And so there's a relatively small share of the overall cost. So I think you have to kind of play around with a bunch of these things, but you also want to be looking not at what it has been historically, but what is the stuff that they're doing to drive that into the future. And that's, I think, the thing that I'm more worried about the U.S. There are certainly areas of the U.S., like, for example, if you're looking at Bitcoin mining, there's areas in Texas that you can do quite cheap power and be fairly efficient there. But there's just no plausibility of getting to the levels that we want in terms of cost and scale based on how they're doing it now at nearly the rate that China will. And I think they should just be ramping that thing up to the next level.
So trying to put this into context, I guess what the US would try to avoid is having a China leading on cheap and abundant energy that will also lead to even higher dominance on production capacity that will lead to more and more advanced robots with more advanced AI kind of driving the robots, so to speak. Because, I mean, in my mind, a society where you are ahead on both AI and robotics, that would be so much more important on whether you are, compared to whether you can produce a car effectively, for example, if we're looking 20 years into the future.
Yeah. I think that's a really good analogy. I think clearly having robots that are great are going to give you so much. And you can kind of think of it again, so what are we saying? We're saying that AI is supposed to collapse the cost of intelligence down super low, create, this abundant supply of intelligence. Well, that intelligence needs to be applied to something in a practical way. And so it's going to express itself through robotics. And so it's kind of like, all right, if the great intelligence you have has no hands to do anything, well, then how intelligent is it? And no, I think it's quite questionable how far ahead many countries can stay on the area of technology, right? If you sort of think, all right, there's a famous expression that said, how far ahead is the US versus China? And they're 12 hours. Which is how long it takes them to wake up and copy. And, technology is notoriously notoriously hard to create, but very easy to copy. And that's how we've got abundance, right? Look, it's really, really tough to have some scientific breakthrough, but you have that breakthrough and I can replicate it really quickly. And so I don't see a path in most things where it is easy to maintain a significant lead. And I think you have a factor of disproportionate or of diminishing returns as you advance, right? You think about the iPhone. When you came out with the first iPhone, the first one to the iPhone 3 to the 3S to, whatever, this was a pretty big jump each time. And now you're it's the 14, the 15. What's the difference? I can't really tell the difference. So you have this kind of asymptotic relationship with the advancement of technology. And so right now, maybe it seems like a big deal if you're 6 months ahead in foundation models or something for AI. But if we fast forward 20 years, probably 6 months doesn't matter, right? You probably have to be 5 years ahead. It's very unclear how you remain that far ahead in practical terms. I think what's hard, though, to do is production, right? That Elon Musk will kind of famously say, he'll say, prototyping is easy, production is hard. And so if the US and other countries haven't built the capacity internally to do the production side of things, if somebody is 10 years ahead on that, they might stay 10 years ahead on that because you have to build a whole bunch of real stuff. You think about just buildings, right? I might know exactly how to build a building. It still takes me 3 or 5 years to build a building. If you're in California, it takes you 12 years to build a building. It's almost impossible because of all the permitting and all this sort of stuff. So I think, it's really, really important that they be able to handle that side of it. And then once you've got it, the thing I think you and I were discussing before that is really important is listen, all those robots need to be plugged in somewhere. If your grid can't handle these robots, you're screwed. So this is, again, why I come to, you need a very coherent energy policy that is designed to rapidly scale up abundant power, to distribute it broadly, because the electric grid in the U.S. is a big problem, and simultaneously drive the costs down so that you can do lots more stuff. I mean, imagine just like from like the quality of life standpoint, if you say 20% of the CPI basket is composed of energy directly and indirectly, if you can collapse that by a factor of 10, you just reduce people's cost of living by, like 18% of extra money that is freed up for other things that are better for them. And, maybe they put that into more and more different types of production, et cetera. You think about on areas of health, like if you can have doctors that are robotic, that know how to do surgery perfectly, there's never any errors, et cetera, or like far, far fewer human errors than you would normally have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's a big deal. It translates into so many areas of life. And so why wouldn't you be doing everything you can to advance that?
So you live in Dubai, and I guess Dubai are trying to kind of be quite far ahead in terms of implementing AI and robotics. Do you see any cost anywhere in terms of, any drop in cost of living in Dubai as a result of AI and robotics yet, or do you expect to see it?
No, I don't see anything yet. And, I was asking people this question because I think, to me, sort of the ultimate sci-fi moment is when we're driving down the street and we look out the window and we see a humanoid robot walking along. Like, that will be, for me, the sci-fi moment, right? Where I just feel like I'm in an Isaac Asimov novel or something like that. And so I did a poll on Twitter a little while ago, but like, hey, how long do you think it will be before that happens? And I mean, I'm curious, how long do you think it will be before you're walking along and you see or driving along and you see a humanoid robot walking along?
I understand you see this in China. I understand that there has been a marathon in China where quite a lot of people are running together with their robot pal.
That's interesting. I got to check that out. That sounds super cool.
Yeah, I'm going to do a future podcast on it. There are two fellow Danish futurists who go to China quite a lot, and the female one, she has done videos of this, and I just had a talk with her, and it just seems like China is maybe like 5 years ahead of the US in that respect.
Yep.
And I also don't know if you tried it, but have you ever tried to take the train between, it must be San Francisco at the one end, and I don't know where it ends, but I've taken it to San Jose. It's like going back in time, right? And
yeah.
like to the 60s or 70s or something.
Yep.
And then when you take the market train in China,
yep.
And this is even quite a number of years ago, I took one of the futuristic trains.
Yep.
You feel like you travel forward in time.
Yep.
So it's kind of weird, like Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to feel like going back in time.
Yes.
But so that
legit.
kind of moment has already happened, I guess, in China.
Yep.
But it will take a little bit of time, I suppose. Maybe it's also a culture thing. I don't know about these moments. I did a video on AI companionship, and it was a little bit a joke in the beginning, and then I did some research, and it turned out that especially young men in the US are really struggling finding women to be in relationships with. And then
interesting, right?
I think it was like 35% said that they would consider an AI romance.
Oh wow,
interesting.
Instead
of a woman, right? So I was quite shocked. I made this video. Then I got like 200 comments of people, all of them men, saying it's a no-brainer. Of course I would like an AI girlfriend.
Wow.
And not a real one.
That's super interesting.
So for me, that was kind of one of those moments that I'm like, wow, we are much further into the future than I thought, because I'm not meeting any of these men in my life, who would say, I want the AI girlfriend.
Yep, totally.
So maybe these future moments are happening a little bit under the radar.
Yeah, that's really fascinating that you were getting that kind of feedback. I mean, it's interesting to me because I feel like from a social psychological standpoint, like, look, you can go and you have a great conversation with ChatGPT to go and learn something, right? Like it's just a phenomenal tutor. It's, just real ridiculously great in that regard. And I can understand how from a psychological standpoint, it can have a back and forth conversation with you that feels great. And, you can, do all this sort of stuff. I would think that, you want to like hug the person and kiss the person and, stuff like this. And, that's, I don't get any of that from an AI at this point in time. And so, you need to advance pretty far to get there, but it's be interesting.
Was kind of surprising. I just tested out. I can't recall what it was, but you could get this kind of AI pal, and it wasn't very funny. I mean, you just more or less it just talks back to you with what you want to hear, right? So if you say, "Oh, you seem really nice," it will just say, "You also seem super nice." I mean, it's so predictable, right?
Yep.
So I don't get it. But I guess
I've heard from some friends that using ChatGPT on dating apps to respond to the girls is remarkably effective. So I don't know.
It could make sense, right? I mean, I sometimes use it to say, what's a good hook for this video or what's a good title. And sometimes when I'm like, my personal opinion is that might not be a great title. Then quite often it is right, and I do get better results by listening to ChatGPT and other AI models than just picking myself.
Interesting.
So to some extent, I guess the future is here in some aspects. I mean, just like longevity, right? You meet people who have like a biological age of 18, even though they're like 40.
Yep.
You meet people who apparently want a robot or AI girlfriend or boyfriend. I mean, it's already there. It's just not the people I hang out with personally.
I mean, I would love a robot housekeeper. Like, if they gave me a humanoid robot who could, be a housekeeper and, kind of, it's like a digital Alfred, right? It's like, hey, go and pick this thing up for me. Go and grab this, run this errand, and if I could do that, like, I would totally do it. I'd pay quite a lot for that robot.
I would love that robot. I am that robot in our family. Like my 2 kids and my wife. all the time. They're like, get my iPad, get my glasses. So yeah, that robot would be super useful.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, right? To think about how that could be. I kind of think that being very general purpose is a very tough real world AI problem. You think about how long it's taken them to do self-driving. And I've had some arguments with some friends over this because, Elon Musk's been saying since 2016, this is the year of self-driving, and it's 2025 and we still aren't at full self-drive. And I kind of think in my head, doing something around your house is like an order of magnitude more complex because the variations are just so much more abundant compared to what you get from on the road. And so, yeah, it just seems like a very, very tough challenge to have as general purpose. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like once you get a certain number of things figured out, it just kind of automatically can infer a whole bunch of other things, and then you're pretty good.
I guess like the find my iPad stuff is just about scanning the room, right? Do I see it here? If yes, pick it up and bring it to one of the kids. If no, go to the next room and look. But I think you're right. It's not super easy, and apparently the robots available now, they also take actual training on the house. So it's not like from day one, they'll be efficient. It's a little bit like maybe your housekeeper who would actually need to get to know the house in real life.
One of the things that I really wonder about that, like obviously we have, these robot vacuums that, they kind of map out your house by going and bumping into things and stuff like that. And so I think people can really easily relate to that idea in terms of training. When you're looking at, how they would use neural nets to train on image recognition, it needed to see like a picture of an apple like thousands of times before it can recognize an apple reliably, right? And so I wonder to what extent I can just be like, hey, here's the cut relay, versus it's like, how many times do you have to show it the cut relay to be like, this is a knife, this is a fork, this is a spoon, this is a plate, this is like, clearly there'll be like a lot of pre-training in there, but can you just kind of point it out once and then it's like, okay, because if I just have to give it an orientation through my house, no problems, right? I'm fine to even do a detailed orientation. This is my computer. This is where the socks are stored. This is how I like them put. This is, take the clothes and, put them in the closet like this. Okay, great. No big deal. I'm quite happy to do a one-time orientation. But if I have to repeatedly do it over and over before it gets it, then I'm going to be fairly frustrated and probably say to heck with it. I'll just go with something a little bit more intelligent for a while.
But I think things are changing in terms of the capabilities. I had kind of an aha moment last week because my son sent me a video that I kind of woke up to the next morning where he is playing his 10. He's playing with another kid that's also 10. And they're picking up snakes in the backyard of the other kid's house, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, are you guys nuts? There are some snakes in Cyprus that are actually dangerous, right? Yep. And there were like 4 or 5 different snakes. And then I screenshotted something from this video that was not in great quality. I uploaded it, to ChatGPT saying, is this a dangerous snake? We live in Cyprus. Yep. And it said, oh, that's a rubber snake. It's not a real snake. And ChatGPT was right. This kid was just really trained at actually making it look like, when he caught it and making the movement.
That's great.
So ChatGPT kind of caught the idea saying, this snake, there's no snake in Cyprus that would have this pattern. You're they are making a fool of you. So, and I think that was an aha moment. That was pretty difficult. And I don't think it could have done that like 6 months ago.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've tried like vibe coding, but I decided recently, all right, I should, be on top of this AI coding thing and see what's possible. And so I reached out to a friend who's been working with this for, the last year or something. And I said, hey, let's do a project together. Let's, figure out a simple app and have the AI do it and try to. And he told me, it was like, yeah, a year ago, like it was just useless. But now you use Gemini 2.0, 2.5 with Cursor, and it's like remarkably good what it can do. And, it won't do super complex projects perfectly, infinitely, but you can pretty powerfully vibe code stuff. And that's advancements that have just come in the last few months, right? If you were to go to Gemini 2 compared to 2.5, it's just like a meaningful improvement. So let's fast forward 12 months from now. It's probably going to be a lot better. I think, what did somebody say about, is it the new Llama model that has like a 10 million token context window or something? Which is like pretty huge in terms of how much stuff you can put in there. I don't know what it takes for you to have like a sophisticated piece of code, but I would guess that we're getting to the point where you'll be able to have pretty sophisticated projects with lots of microservices and things like this, and it can know all of it in context at all given times and adjust accordingly. And so if that's the case, I mean, it'll be pretty insane.
But what about in your own business, for example? Are you seeing AI transforming that? I mean, I'm, for example, thinking about, I just filled out a German tax form for my German company. And I had to do it manually. And I got even though I could translate it to English, I had to guess a number of times. But I use ChatGPT all the time to say, what do you believe I should answer under these conditions? And it did help me. But it still took me 1.5 hours to complete this form.
Yep.
Are you seeing like helping your clients that you can use AI?
Yeah. So I actually think a few things are true. So one is, I think that a bunch of the work that we do is or will be significantly reduced by AI. I remember when ChatGPT, whatever it was version 3 or something, they kind of original one came out, I was like, oh, let me try doing it for tax planning. And it was just really awful. It was no good. Nowadays, it's pretty good. And there's actually a startup that I'm doing some stuff with. A friend and client kind of came and said, hey, listen, we're doing this in the area of wealth management, and we're building on some tax planning stuff, et cetera. And we're going to use this AI advisor, and you want to kind of help out and be part. So I'm kind of assisting with them. And it's not perfect. It's not like at the same level as if I give you advice versus it, but it's pretty good. Just kind of feeding in all the person's information and being able to spit out like some pretty solid recommendation information. And then I find that, for example, we do these kind of global strategy reports for people. And this is like, it's ended up being a 100-page review, and we cite all sorts of laws, and we do all kinds of things like that. And so one of the examples was we were doing some stuff recently related to Panamanian law. Of course, it's in Spanish. And we try to always cite like the original law itself, so we can kind of, you don't have to trust people's interpretation layers through. Well, I was trying to Google the tax code there, and I'm like, Google was giving me a terrible time with getting the tax code. And I asked ChatGPT, I'm like, hey, listen, can you give me a link to this in Spanish? And it's like, sure, boom, here it is. And like, I couldn't even find it on Google. Google is just awful. And it comes out and it finds it, and then it interprets it and it translates it and does all these different things, like really good. So certainly compressing the amount of stuff that needs to be done down pretty dramatically, I find is significant and significantly good for it. I've talked to some clients who have said they'll go to various different lawyers, and they'll frequently ask ChatGPT before they go to the lawyer, and ChatGPT is frequently quite spot on. I think that at this stage, for our purposes, it's helpful for research. It's helpful for just like shortening the time frame and the amount of work that is necessary. We kind of always still do things manually and write stuff up ourselves, etc. But in addition to that, I think that right now people, they can't quite trust it. And so it's when it's something really important, you're like, oh, you know what? I would rather pay an expert to go and make sure I have the proper stuff for a lot other than relying on ChatGPT. And I do think something very important is you do need to know how to prompt it. So like in my case, I can get pretty good information from it because it's sort of an information retrieval and summary system. But I also know how to be like, well, hang on a minute, dig into this thing for me. Okay, now it digs into that. And if you can dig a few layers deep, it ends up coming up with something really, really solid. But if you didn't know to ask certain of these other questions, you'd miss things because you didn't know. It's like, oh, hey, I have to ask about these controlled foreign companies rules. Never heard of controlled foreign companies. Why would I ask about that? What about, something in the tax treaty here? Let's ask about that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think you still need to have a feel for what the end result is going to be. Yeah. So if it comes up with something that just sounds off, you're like, no, something is up here. But yeah. I mean, let's say you have 10 people working for you and maybe some external ones. When do you think one day you would go, say, to 5 of them or more? Well, because of AI, it doesn't make any sense? Or do you think you can just find something else and they could pivot and you can service your clients in another way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question of would it be the same people, right? Because certainly, like, I'm not bearish. So I've heard some people call it jobageddon, right? We're going to have just like wholesale replacement of jobs, and we're going to need UBI, and everybody's going to be able to do nothing. I'm like quite bearish on that idea. I actually think that, no, you kind of think about, okay, well, if the AI is really smart, then you're super empowered to do tons more things because your job basically becomes controlling some AI agents. And so, the field of things you can do broadened dramatically without needing to go through significant retraining. And that's powerful. There's also like a layer of bullshit jobs on top of bullshit jobs that, there's like this kind of weird way that we've built up this economy that isn't actually doing stuff, but they're servicing stuff that is built on top of that stuff. So like, I think there's a lot of things that will be around there. So if I was just to imagine some of the people who work for me, I mean, some of the people are doing like hands-on practical stuff. We could certainly automate some of those things away. And so definitely reduce a bunch of what they are doing. I mean, customer service stuff, of course, AI can learn to do pretty well when it's digital. There's obviously some things where you like have to physically go to an office. You take somebody down there, and if you have to go in person, say you're in Cyprus and you're at the immigration office, like you want somebody who knows Greek and can go and they know the people at the office, and they can kind of, hey, here's where we go, here's where we submit this form, here's what we do. You wait, no, that's like you're not going to quickly replace that. And there's so many legacy dependencies. Like in theory, could you say, hey, well, let's just replace the agent at the counter with a computer system and do all this online? In theory, you could, but because of the way that the institution functions, it's very unlikely you will do that at any reasonable period of time. So most likely 10 years from now, you'll still go down to the immigration office and you'll still sign something manually and stamp something and whatever, even though it's not technically necessary. So, yeah, so I could see a bunch of our jobs being reduced considerably. I could see, and then would I take the same people? I think that's like my real question. Because I can obviously find other things for them to do, but would they be the ones I would get to do that? Because there is like some interesting mindset stuff here. I don't know if you've tried training people in areas outside of their proficiency and interest, but I find it incredibly difficult. Like, I'm terrible at it. I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours trying to train people in areas that they just don't have. It's a combination of a competency, but it's also like an interest in developing that competency. And if they don't have it, like, it's like I just kept reteaching the same things over and over again, and it just doesn't stick. So, yeah, I think, this is kind of cliche to say. I hate to say this because I think I don't like to say the normal thing, but, it's that, listen, people who learn to use AI will replace the ones who don't learn to use AI. And you've got to just be much more adaptive, much more broad in your curiosity and willingness to apply these things to problem solving and thinking. And if you do, you're probably okay for quite a long period of time. And if you don't, you're probably in a lot of trouble.
So maybe staying like with thinking about a company like your own. So, I mean, you advise people on kind of minimizing tax, I guess, when they're relocating. What sort of skills do you think AI can replace? And what sort of skills, is it the people skills, that will be important going forward?
So like it's super interesting to think about this, right? Because of course, in our, again, like the Isaac Asimov worldview of things, everything can be done by AI. I mean, fundamentally, unless you believe there is something really special about humans, which I mostly do not, I think like, okay, your brain is basically a neural net and it's been trained to be a particular way. And it turns out that we can build very sophisticated neural nets and train them up for, more or less whatever we've been trained up for. And so as a result, what's the deal there? So given enough time, I think that's probably true, that there aren't many things that we can do. The first thing that I think is probably durable for a long time is in-person sales. Like, I do think there's a certain thing about influence over another person that if you're in front of another person, they have the same cognitive biases, they have the same, emotional triggers, etc., that the act of selling, if you have abundance of everything except for attention, then attention is super valuable, and I can probably get your attention sitting in front of you and having a relationship with you, etc. Like, I think that's going to be valuable for a very long time. So, like, to me, that is probably the most durable, high-value skill that is going to last for decades, is just sales, like relationship-driven sales. Not to say that you can't do a lot of sales through AI. I think you can. Like, you can clearly have chatbots that can, go and sell probably as well as anybody who is going to be alive. I've heard that actually these phone systems where you can call people up and have the AI talk to them have just become remarkably great. I was told that it's a little bit better on lead gen than it is on closing. Closing apparently is a little bit weaker, but that's something you can solve, right? You can keep going and making it work. So yeah, I think like these things just clearly are things that you can solve for. But being there with the person, it's just like there is a human element to it that I think you will have a place. And I just don't think that, I think that humans will want to give some attention to humans, and a robot standing in front of you is not likely to displace that whole sector of the economy. Meaning, yes, you can have a attendant at a store that is a robot, that is an AI, that's talking to you. But in a room of different people, if somebody's going to talk to you, it's not like you can. I think there will be a general human preference to deal with a human and build a relationship with a human by at least a certain subset of the population, probably a fairly large subset of the population. And as a result, that will have some value. So that's something I'd say will be durable. I think translation is just dead. Like, the whole world of translation is just gone from AI. Like, AI is just going to do it already does such a good job of it that, why would you ever need translators? This seems ridiculous to me. Summarizing information, any sort of clerical things like that, just far better. Your hotel rooms are going to be booked probably much easier by an AI, etc. However, I'm not sure the degree to which your taste in what it is that you like will be better picked up by a human than somebody else who knows you really well. That's like maybe when I think about if you travel and you look at, you're scrolling through the hotels, you see pictures of the bathroom and you're like, oh, I don't like that one. I do like that one, etc. Will it know that better than a person in the near future? I don't know. That's a interesting question. Maybe it will. Maybe you can just it's not a big enough deal that it justifies having a person involved in any of those processes.
You could probably test it, right? Quite easily.
What was that?
Like, for example, you could do a test quite easily. You could say,
you could,
like Netflix, for example, is an algorithm.
Yep.
So it will suggest movies to you, and then you could take your partner, your best friend, and says, try to find the 5 movies I would be most likely to want to watch tonight, and we'll see the 5 first ones that Netflix suggests.
Well,
and then we could see.
I think there's another interesting thing there, and I've been thinking about this content creation thing a lot, which is, so in theory, in the future, we'll be able to have hyper-personalized content, right? You just sit down and it just generates on the fly for you whatever it is that you're going to like. But to what extent is the content you consume a social activity? Because a part of the thing is oh, did you see the latest episode of Black Mirror? Did you see the latest episode of White Lotus? And so that really has nothing to do with whether it's the thing you will most like. It is that there is a social element to this process, and therefore we don't want hyper-personalization because we want something that connects us. We have a human need for connection. And so in that, again, the Netflix algorithm is almost inherently better because it can just know what your friends watch. It can be like, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so just watched this. And you're like, well, great, I'll watch that so I can have something to talk to them about, And, it's just inherently efficient at doing that. It's interesting.
Yeah, but it kind of also ties back to our talk about the robotic society. When will we have that, watershed moment where we'll see these robots walking down the street? So I haven't been to China recently, but I understand that moment is there. Also, I guess the self-driving car moment is.
Have you taken a full self-driving car yet? Have you been in a Waymo taxi or something?
No, I'm going 6 weeks to the US, and I plan to try it there.
That'd be great.
Have you?
I haven't. No, it's something that I would like to try, just for the experience.
But why isn't it available in Dubai yet? Normally, they want to be first and stuff like this, right?
Yeah, so it's possible that it is available in some place, and I just haven't, cared enough to pay attention to it. Right? It's possible that that's the situation, but otherwise, if not, then it's coming quite quickly, I'm sure. So that's.
But you're not seeing it. You're not seeing a ton
No, it's definitely not a widely available thing. It's definitely. I have not had an experience of walking down the street and seeing a car go by without a driver. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know yet in San Francisco, for example, if that is something you generally see. I mean, I get a sense from the YouTube videos that it is relatively common.
Uh-huh.
But from China, it seems quite normal at this point to have self-driving cars. But I think that will be an important moment. I also think, like, when will we feel that actual flexibility of not needing to have a car, for example? I think that's an important moment. I mean, you kind of have it with these um, car services where on your app, we have Right Now, for example, here in Cyprus, where you can find the nearest car and then you can rent it via the app. But that would just
Yep.
be 100 times more efficient if I didn't
Yep.
have to walk to it. It could just come
Yes.
to the house.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's probably more regulation. I mean, since it is there in China and in San Francisco, San Francisco is not easy to drive in,
Mhm.
if I remember it correctly. China is not easy to drive in either at all.
Yep.
So it must be possible, right? In many cities around the world.
Yeah. One would think that there's a bunch of places. I think like part of it is safety tests, part of it is isolating the right area, part of it is regulation, part of it is there's like a whole bunch of different things they have going on as they try to get there. As I recall, Waymo still has a remote driver who's somewhere like monitoring it and can intervene, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, but probably they can't attend to every situation, because otherwise you wouldn't have these situations with two Waymo cars waiting on each other and then everything gets stuck, right? But yeah, I think, I mean, the second it's just one guy maybe controlling or overseeing 100 cars, it's still pretty amazing. But let's get back to the China thing. So do you think, like, the current administration, of course, they're probably best known for some of the crazy stunts that Trump is pulling off,
Yep.
but I mean, do you see this whole situation of the tariffs going up? Is it all about pulling production back to the U.S. or to trusted countries? And is it all about kind of deregulation, maybe in Europe, to give U.S. AI tech kind of an advantage, so they don't have all these difficulties rolling out in Europe, because they're quite top on that? I mean, do you think those are kind of the major strategic bets of the current administration?
Well, so I don't think it's just that. No, I think first of all, I think there's an ideological thing about wanting to tax people outside of the country as opposed to inside of the country, and sort of shifting the place that the tax burden exists. I don't think this is the best way to do that. I kind of, back in 2016, when Trump got in the first time, I sort of had a proposal for how I thought the U.S. could do this. And, like, I literally am in the business of tax. I'm fairly sophisticated about how these things work. And so, to me, the way that I would be doing it would not be through tariffs. I think that's quite crude, and I mean, it kind of inherently pushes a lot of cost onto the end user. Whereas what you should actually be doing is trying to tax foreign companies on profits generated from U.S.-based sales, and bringing in the money that way, as well as perhaps trying to tax foreign investors on gains from U.S.-based equity capital gains. So those two things, I think, would be more logical ways of going about this. But I do think there's an ideological desire to say, hey, listen, for a long time, the U.S. was supported by fees paid from outside the country to inside the country. Let's kind of change that balance back. So that's one thing I think that is going on. I think, yes, another one is the desire to reshore. The thing that I have a problem with this desire to reshore is, there's so many interdependencies of reshoring, right? Like I said, you need a talented pool of workers who are able to work those jobs. You need a whole bunch of infrastructure. You need a bunch of regulatory changes. You then need to do the build out of, like, it's not just like, hey, great, we're going to start building this here. It's like, no, you might have a 5 to 10 year build out of some sort of a factory or infrastructure or whatever that you're then going to put the people in, that you're going to, and so, that's a little bit problematic. It's especially problematic when you consider that if I am a major corporation and I'm making a multi-decade capital investment decision, I need to rely on the stability of these policies. And if I don't know what those policies will be in 6 months or a year, I'm not going to make a multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar bet on where I'm doing this or how I'm doing it. And so I think that's deeply problematic for them to be able to do this. And of course, the administration may be gone in 4 years, even frankly within, the next, whatever it is, 16 months or something like that. You could end up with a turnover at the midterms that kind of applies pressure in some direction. So I think it's very difficult to go about the changes that they want. And the default assumption seems to be that they won't succeed in that. We'll see. Might be wrong, but it seems like it's a challenge to get there. And then I do think there is some sort of a geopolitical, we want to win against China. China is, the one threat that we have in the world. And so let's try and weaken them. Let's try to slow them down. I think we talked last time about this, that I'm quite bearish on that idea. I think that, they will probably end up destroying $500 billion of ASML market cap over the next 15 or 20 years because of the fact that they're insistent on not allowing this technology to go into China. And as a result, China will come up with their own, and then they will have the Chinese market, plus they'll compete globally. And now all of a sudden, you not only lost market share, you also lost margins. And that's just deeply destructive. It's, by the way, probably quite good for the world, right? Like, you don't really want to depend on any single manufacturer of a particular valuable technology. So it's probably better for the world that you have ASML plus somebody else doing advanced lithography. But for, Europe and for Netherlands, that's really bad because you're just going to crush a lot of value in that part of the world. So, yeah, I think all these things converge in their attempts to make these changes. And I think that a lot of them are probably well motivated, but I think it's really, really tough to execute on. And there's so many pieces that it's like you have to get 4 things right at the same time. And if you get any one of them wrong, then the whole thing comes apart because, you didn't, like, regulation is a good example, right? You could be like, let's get all the people and let's have the incentives to bring the stuff here and let's get people on side. But we don't have the regulations, so we can't build it, so we're screwed. And the same thing is true if you don't have the talent, right? You're like, well, we have the regulations and we have this stuff and we have the capital but we just don't have the talent bed. Well, then we're screwed. And so trying to make those things all work together, I don't know, it's a very tough problem. And interestingly, the Chinese system is probably much better equipped to create a forcing function in that regard than the American system is, because they can just come and they can say, hey, top down, this is going to be the priority. We're going to reallocate an enormous amount of resources in whatever way is necessary to make this happen. So yeah, it's interesting that even if you think about wealth divides, I was actually reflecting the other day of like, okay, the economy of the future, thinking about a world where you have a lot of automation, you have a lot of robotics, you have a lot of AI, etc. Like, what political structure, social structure ends up being positive? And I'm quite bearish UBI. I don't think UBI works particularly well, in part because I just don't think it's good to have people doing nothing, right? Like, I think that people get a sense of purpose from things. And guess what? The Chinese system is much more optimally set up to say, hey, we don't care about anything else. We're just going to incentivize you to create jobs. And these jobs, we know they're not that efficient. We know that a machine can do that job better. We don't care. We just want to put people to work. And, so therefore, that's what's going to happen. And so, I don't know. To me, it makes me think, well, the Chinese system is probably better suited for the AI robotics era than a lot of these other systems.
So where does this all leave us? The EU, despite its economic weight, continues to lag behind, held back by a lack of focus on innovation and a failing energy policy, especially in countries like Germany. The US, while currently leading in AI capabilities, is far from secure. Its fragmented and short-term energy strategy could eventually drag it out of the lead, especially as global competition accelerates. China, meanwhile, is playing the long game, aligning AI, robotics, and energy into a coherent national strategy. Who wins this race is still up in the air, but one thing is clear: without smart, future-focused politics, the West may end up watching from the sidelines.